Well, let's take the bull by the horns, if so to speak. And yesterday you had the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And there was a California team winning. I hope people is happy over there.
Well, you know, Los Angeles, I live in the San Francisco area, and Los Angeles is our rival city. Yeah. So we're never happy when Los
You're
Angeles
never happy.
wins.
I was wondering if you will live in the LA area or in another one, so it could be concerned and not with the result. But anyway,
yeah,
let's drop the results and let's talk. And I think it's a good opportunity to talk about the Super Bowl as an advertising phenomenon.
Yes.
How do you analyze it? What do you think it means for the industry? All the hype around the ads in the Super Bowl, all the initiatives that brands put on, get on with in respect with the ads they create, and all the conversation about it. Do you think it's good? It's bad? What does it mean for the industry? And what?
Yeah, I think it used to be very exciting for the industry that there was one day a year where people actually paid attention to advertising instead of trying to avoid advertising. And but I think those days are over. I think we have what can I call it? Super Bowl fatigue. I think the public has had enough of all the hype about Super Bowl advertising. The advertising really isn't that much better than it is in a typical football game, in my opinion. And consequently, it has become a festival of celebrities rather than a festival of advertising. Almost every ad this year featured some celebrity or other. And what that tells me about the advertising industry is that it's easier to find a celebrity than it is to find a good idea. And so people who are struggling to find a good idea, it's easier to go out and pay a celebrity to be in your spot and pretend you had a good idea. I wish Super Bowl advertising was better than it is. It's just, you know, the amount of money that is spent on production is overwhelming. I mean, the production is just beautiful and amazing, and but there's an absence of really good advertising ideas, I think, and consequently, I don't think the public remembers the ads. They remember the celebrities, but I don't think they remember the ads very much or the brands that are advertising very much. Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question?
Yes, of course. And so do you think, I mean, a change of strategy would prove apt in this concerning this big event, that the brands should think over it in other ways?
Well, there are two ways to think about Super Bowl strategy. One is as a media strategy, and second as a creative strategy. As a media strategy, I think the Super Bowl still has cachet because so much media these days is fragmented. It's hard to find a place where you can get 100 million people around the world together to see an ad. And the Super Bowl really is the only place you can do that. But that doesn't mean that creative strategy goes along with that. You still need to say something that is creative in a way that people remember it and that people connect it with your brand. A lot of what I saw yesterday was generic in the sense that it was more either for a category rather than a specific brand, or it was a, a message of hopefulness, and that, you know, is very nice, but doesn't necessarily do much to sell your brand or your product. So I think that the basics of advertising should not be thrown out the window just because you're doing a Super Bowl spot. You still need to say something about your product or your brand that is going to stick with people, and that's going to be memorable, and that's going to have some effect on your bottom line.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's change the subject. And you've been writing for a certain amount of time now about the growing use, how the growing use of personal data has transformed advertising from what you call a minor annoyance to a major menace or disaster. But the industry has similarly happily embraced the possibilities of ad tech in digital advertising, and the investment in this kind of advertising is constantly growing.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you're preaching in the desert, that the message is going through in any way, or just people doesn't want to listen, or what's your feeling about it?
I'm probably preaching in the desert. I don't think my opinion is widely shared in the advertising industry. I think there are people in certain governmental institutions, certain regulatory institutions, who understand what's going on and understand why it's dangerous for societies to have people collecting so much information about individuals. I think there's a pretty clear history of how dangerous this can be, and why we should not allow it to continue. But that doesn't mean that my point of view is shared, certainly not by many in the advertising industry who are at top levels, and also not by the public in general. I think the public in general doesn't really understand how deeply they are being followed and how bad surveillance about them is. I don't think they understand that. And in the advertising industry, especially at the top of the advertising industry and in the trade organizations, too many people are making too much money. And they don't want to face the reality of what damage tracking is doing to individuals and to societies in general. And the result of that is that it's taken a very long time for the industry to understand this and for regulators to understand it. But I think there is finally some movement. Recently, the adjudication of a lawsuit brought against the IAB Europe, saying that they were breaking the law in their the pop-ups that they have about agreeing to tracking. That was upheld.
You mean the transparency framework, that the
yes,
things that
exactly.
if you allow
yes.
for cookies, okay.
Exactly. That was ruled to be illegal. Mm-hmm. That, in my opinion, is a very good thing. But we have to wait to see, because the problem is we have a lot of legislation and regulation against tracking, but very little or no enforcement of it. And regulations that are not enforced are really not very much better than no regulations at all. And the big ad tech companies, the Googles, the Facebooks, YouTube, Amazon, they go ahead and track us as much as they like. And if they get fined, so what? So they pay a little fine. To them, it's not much money, you know. Business as usual goes on regardless of what the regulations say. In my mind, this is not healthy. And I am hoping that the regulators and the legislators in the European parliaments come to terms with this and make the penalties for breaking the law and doing illegal things much stronger and have personal accountability for this. Because if you're the CEO of an ag tech company and you're doing illegal things and you get fined whatever the amount is, so what? So your company pays the fine and you go on, you continue doing what you're doing. But if you're personally responsible, if the fine is to you, or if you're subject to jail time for breaking the law, then it's a whole different thing. Then everything changes and people will start to abide by the regulations and abide by the legislation. So that's what I think probably needs to happen for us, for the online advertising ecosystem to come into line with what the regulations say they should be doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there are two things that I should ask you, taking on from your words. One is, so we must assume, we consumers, we people, we citizens, must assume that we have part of corporates of the situation because we are providing data without thinking too much about it to all and sundry. So we are responsible, but we are happy with that. It seems that people is happy with that and not thinking much about the consequences.
People don't understand that they are not giving informed consent. What they are doing is they're confused by the consent pop-ups. They don't know what they mean. They don't know what the implications of them are. And consequently, it's just easier to ignore it and check allow all than it is to go in and figure out what you're consenting to. Consent that is not informed is not true consent. It is, we're being coerced into consent to be tracking, and that's what was that was the ruling. Part of the ruling that was made a couple of weeks ago is that the consent pop-ups are not really informed consent.
Okay. And the other part of the thing is, maybe for the first time in history, or companies are so big and so powerful that norms and regulation doesn't bother them at all. They are above laws and regulations.
That is exactly right. Google, Facebook, Amazon, they really don't seem to care much what governments say. They operate in a world of their own. Many government regulators and legislators are afraid of them because they contribute so much. Their lobbying power is so great. And it's very unhealthy. These are transnational companies who behave as if they're above the law. And I don't see how that's good for society. I don't see how that's good for the advertising industry, to be honest. I think we have lost a lot of whatever goodwill we had, which, you know, people never really loved advertising very much. It's always been, as I said in one of my books, a minor annoyance. But now I think it's much worse. There was a study recently by, I think it was BBH Labs, that showed that in the past 20 years, the number of people who say advertising has become annoying has doubled. That's not healthy for the advertising industry. There's no way that that's good for us.
Okay, let's see what's happened, what the future brings to us on this matter, which is certainly important. Well, now let's revert to you for a while. And well, of course, you're now and have been for a number of years a very well-known blogger, author, speaker, and so on. But me personally, and maybe some readers and viewers of this interview are interested in knowing how did it came that you were started you started in advertising? How did you become interested in advertising? How did you enter the industry? What was the beginning of it all?
Well, I never thought I would be in the advertising industry. I had no idea that there even was an advertising industry, to be honest. I was a young man and I was a teacher. I was a science teacher and I was a terrible teacher. I was awful. You know,
believe that. I cannot believe that you were
no, it's true. No, it's true. Teachers are wonderful people. They're patient and they're nurturing, and I'm very impatient and I'm not nurturing. I'm a pain in the ass. And so I did it for a few years and I really wasn't good at it. And I knew I needed to do something else. And so one day, just by chance, I ran into an old friend of mine from college and I asked him what he was doing. And he said he worked in advertising. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, you know the commercials on TV? I said, yeah. He says, I write those. I said, oh, that sounds like fun. He said, yeah, I think you would be really good at that. I said, really? What do I need to do? And he gave me the name of, of a recruiter. And I went and I spoke to her and she told me I'd never get a job. But I had put together a portfolio of sample ads and I brought it to a few people and I got a job as a copywriter working for, this was in New York City, working for Panasonic, the electronics company. And I worked there for a couple of years and then I moved out to San Francisco and got a job in a small agency as a copywriter. And we grew and grew and eventually we became the largest independent advertising agency in San Francisco. And I became creative director of the company. And then I became president of the company, and then we were bought by an international, a publicly held agency, and I became CEO of their U.S. operation for a few years. Then I left there, and I was going to leave the agency business, and I just wanted to do freelance creative work. Which I did for about 3 years. And then I was offered a partnership in another agency. And I kind of missed the agency environment, working on my own as a freelance creative person. I missed the agency environment. So I went back and started another agency and we became pretty successful. And I did that for, almost 20 years. And then I retired from the agency business about 9 years ago, I guess. I sold my share of the agency to my partners. And since then, I've been doing writing and speaking. I've had a second career as a writer and speaker, which has been very rewarding, not as lucrative as the agency business was, but more personally rewarding to me than the agency business was. And I've enjoyed it very much.
Okay, you've been, well, anyway, a lot of time working in agencies, first as an employee, then as an executive, then as a partner of another one. What did you enjoy most about agency life, about working in an agency? What do you miss? Do you miss something about it?
The thing I enjoyed most was doing creative work. That was, to me, there were two things that were fun: doing creative work and new business pitches. Those were fun. Everything else about the agency business was torture for me. I hated, particularly when I was CEO, I hated the financial part of it. I hated the HR, the human resources part of it, because I was terrible at hiring people. I always hired the wrong people, and I was just bad at it. I didn't like, client interaction was sometimes fun, but mostly painful. So it was really the creative work and new business pitches that I enjoyed the most. I enjoyed the creative work because it was so challenging to come up with a good idea. It's so, people don't realize how hard it is to do good advertising. It's easy to do mediocre advertising. It's so hard to do really good advertising that both that where you are satisfied yourself and your client is satisfied. You're doing something that that works for everyone. It's easy to fool yourself into thinking you're doing something good and the client doesn't really like it. It's easy to please the client with something that's lousy that you know the client will buy, but you're not satisfied with. Very hard to satisfy both yourself and the client and do something that's effective. So that was always a big on for me on the creative side. On the new business side, the part that I loved about doing that was we were on our own when we were presenting ideas at a new business pitch. We were on our own to do it the way we wanted to do it, and there was no client looking over our shoulder telling us, "Oh, you have to do this, and you have to add this, and we could do what we wanted to do," and that was always a freeing. That freed you up. And it challenged you. You had no excuses. You couldn't say, well, the client made me do this, or this one made me. No one's making you do anything. You can do it your way and see what you can come up with. So that's why those were the two most satisfying parts of the business for me.
Mm-hmm. I understand you were a copywriter, that you wrote.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. What did you enjoy most? Writing for TV, for the press, for radio? What did you like it most?
That's a good question. The hardest part was writing for radio. Radio is very hard to write for because in TV and in print, you always have a beautiful picture that can bail you out if you don't come up with a good idea. Radio, there's nothing to bail you out. You're on your own, and it better, and that's why I think radio suffers so much from mediocre writing. I don't know what it's like in Spain, but here in the US, radio advertising is often quite mediocre, and there are not a lot of people who can do it well. The most rewarding and the most scary thing was television. If I did a good TV spot, I knew that night 5 million people are going to see it, and that feels good if you do something good. On the other hand, it's terribly scary if you do something lousy. If you do something bad and 5 million people are going to see it. So that is the part that was challenging when we were doing full campaigns where there was radio and TV and print and out billboards. And I always used to start with the billboard. If I could get a billboard right, if I could find the 5 or 7 words for a billboard that expressed the idea of the campaign, then I knew I had something that I could translate into television, translate into radio, translate into print. So, part of advertising that a lot of people don't understand is it has to be simple. You have to be able, you only have a few seconds of people's attention, and they are not going to spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out what you're trying to say. So you have to simplify, and billboards, outdoor board helped me do that. And that's why I always started with the billboard for a campaign. And if I could get that right, I knew I had something that was viable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And looking at advertising now, looking at the actual pieces of advertising, whether digital or TV spots or whatever, what's your feeling? Do you feel now it's very different from what you did in your time? It's better, it's worse, it's just another game. How do you feel about it?
I think there is pretty good consensus that advertising has become less effective. I think if you speak to a lot of marketing executives, they will tell you advertising is not as effective as it once was. I think one of the reasons, there are a number of reasons for that. Number one, we see so much more advertising than we ever did before. So that makes each advertising, each entity, each ad a little less impactful than it used to be when there wasn't as much advertising. Another thing is that, most advertising now is online advertising, and a considerable part of that is display advertising. And while online video advertising is not quite as bad, online display advertising is horrible. And I think people, I saw a survey not long ago that said among the public, the 8 most disliked types of advertising were all forms of online advertising. And since online advertising is the dominant type of advertising these days, it's not surprising that people find advertising, that people like advertising less and find it more annoying than it once was. Now, let's be fair. Advertising has always been 85 or 90% terrible. Now it's 92 or 93% terrible. So it's a little more terrible, but still there's about half as much good advertising. If there used to be 15% good advertising, now there's 7 or 8% really good advertising. So there's about half as much really good advertising as there once was. Part of that has to do with the short-term nature of online advertising. Online advertising has changed what we think advertising should be. Historically, there are 2 lineages of advertising. There's the brand lineage, and then there's the direct response lineage. And the brand lineage is the stuff that we always saw from Nike and Apple and Coca-Cola and Toyota, and building the brand. The direct response lineage is the lineage of what we used to call junk mail and 800, dial this 800 number, and now it's click here now. And when online advertising started, we didn't know which branch of advertising it was. Was it going to be mostly brand advertising, or was it mostly, well, it turns out it's mostly direct response, click here now advertising. This type of advertising has always been less creative, less appealing to people than brand advertising has been. And now that it's the dominant form of advertising online, once again, it's not surprising that people are not as enthusiastic about advertising as they once were.
Okay. Well, you said a few minutes ago that your new career as a writer and as a speaker and as a blogger has been, or is being, very rewarding, and it's controversial too. You're a controversial writer. Do
Yes.
you meant to be controversial when you started, or it's just that your ideas are controversial and you didn't expect it?
It's a little of both. I mean, I have my opinions because I never studied advertising. And I never took an advertising class, or I never took a marketing class. I had to develop my own ideas about what good advertising was and what effective marketing was. And my ideas came from my experience, not from books, not from what other people said or wrote or did. And consequently, when you invent your own, I don't know, world, you're going to have certain points of view that are different from a lot of other people. And I did that. I had my opinions, but when I write and when I speak, I'm not giving any value if I'm just agreeing with what everyone else says. There's no value in the who cares about someone who gets up and says, this is right, this is right, this is right. You have to have a point of view if you're going to add value to people who are spending the time and energy to listen to you. And so I focused my talks on things that I thought were wrong. Things that I thought were being done in a way that wasn't correct, behaviors of consumers that were being misinterpreted, that's why I think my ideas are controversial, because that's what I focus on. I focus on the things that I find are different, in my opinion, than what the mainstream thinks. Now, I have to tell you, though, that what I have found is that there are a lot more people who agree with me than you would think. There are a lot of people in the advertising business who are afraid to say what they really think. They have jobs to protect, they have homes, they have cars, they have families. If they start talking like I talk, I can say whatever I want because I don't care. I'm retired. I can say whatever I want. I don't have a job or an income to protect. A lot of people do. And there's a little bit of fear in the advertising business about being too controversial inside your agency. But when I speak, I'm always pleasantly surprised at how many people will come up to me in the hotel afterward, or come up to me after I speak and say, I'm so glad you said that. I wish I could say that. I wish I could tell my boss or my client or my colleague or what you're saying. It's surprising how many, I guess, people secretly agree with me, yeah. I think.
Yeah, there's a secret confederacy of people thinking about things and not
yes,
and not having the courage or the opportunity to say them loud.
Yeah, and it's not really courage. I mean, I understand they have jobs. They don't want to get fired. They need, so you have to go along with things sometimes to for practical reasons. And I don't blame them for that. There have been plenty of times when I've agreed with a client when I didn't really agree with them, but I had to, because otherwise I was going to get fired. So
Yeah.
I know that reality, and I don't blame them for that.
Yes, of course. Where are you more successful, or you have more readers or listeners in the agency side or in the client side?
I think that's a good question. I don't really know. I don't really know. I would guess on the agency side, but I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. I don't keep track of who my followers are. I don't track them. No.
You should do some research now.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about, I don't know, but maybe the answer is the same. Where your ideas resonate more with the younger people or with the older people?
Surprisingly, well, not surprisingly, older people agree with me a lot, but I'm surprised at how many young people also agree with me. One of the things that's upsetting to me about the current advertising environment is that it's usually the young people who are rebellious. It's usually young people who say, this is wrong. We have to change that. We're doing the wrong thing here. We need to change. That's how rebelliousness is usually found in young people. But I'm surprised at how little rebelliousness I see in young people in advertising. It's mostly old people like me who are saying, we need to stop tracking. We need to stop surveillance marketing. We need to stop these dangerous activities. I wish there were more young people who understood what the dangers of these kind of activities are. I hope I'm reaching some of them in what I say and what I write.
Hmm. Talking about older or younger people, in Spain,
Yeah.
there's a lot of conversation about how the advertising industry, particularly agencies, throw out people when they reach 50 or whatever. So
Yeah.
a lot of experience is thrown out of the window, and the advertising industry is losing the capacity of mentorship and so on. It is the same in the States. How do you feel about how do you see it?
It's very, very much the same in the States, and it's a very bad and sad state of affairs, because there are certain fields in which young people excel. Young mathematicians and scientists often tend to do their best work in their 20s and 30s. Mm-hmm. But writers, artists tend to do their best work in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. And in the advertising world, the creative end of it, where it's writing and design that are so important, people who are just reaching their peak in their creative abilities are tossed away. And I think that is one of the reasons that the creative side of the advertising business is not as strong as it used to be. There is a tremendous amount of bias against older people in the advertising business. Here in the US, I think, let me make sure I get my numbers close to right. I think about 45 to 50% of the people are 50 years or older, but only 6 or 7% of the agency population is 50 years or older. This is clear evidence of ageism in the advertising industry. And it's very bad for us, because if you look at who wins in the creative world, who wins Pulitzer Prizes, who wins Oscars, who wins here in the US for TV Emmys, who wins Nobel Prizes in creative fields, it's so heavily skewed toward people over 50. And here in the US, I don't know how it is in Spain, but I'll take your word for it. Those people couldn't even get a job in an advertising agency. People who have won Nobel Prizes, Pulitzer Prizes, Oscars, brilliantly creative people could not get a job writing banner ads. It's absurd. And yet it is, but because the advertising industry is so stupidly focused, the advertising industry is so stupidly focused on young people, on advertising to 18 to 34-year-olds who have no money. They think, the agencies think they need young people to talk to these people. But the fact is, here in the US, over half of all consumer spending is done by people over 50.
Yeah.
And over half of spending is done by people over 50, and between 5 and 10% of advertising is directed at them. How stupid is that? You couldn't, in what universe does that make any sense at all? It's completely stupid, but we are living in the past. The advertising agency world is living in an era that's 30 or 40 years out of date, in which 18 to 34-year-olds were the target for everything. And even though the world's population is aging at a phenomenal rate, we are aging. There has been no period in history in which the population of the world is aging like it is now. And yet we ignore older people because the advertising agency business, they do advertising by selfie stick. They're all young and they think everyone is like them, and they create advertising for people like them, even though the majority of the money is spent by people who are not like them. It's a terrible problem.
Okay. Looking at the thing from the other side, do you think advertising is as attractive as a career for young people as it was in the past, or is advertising losing valuable talent because it's not as attractive?
It's not, it's losing value. The second thing, it's losing valuable talent because it's not attractive. One of the reasons for that is the consolidation of the agency business into huge corporate entities. There was a time when advertising agencies were mainly independent enterprises, and they operated the way they wanted to operate. And you had an idea and you showed it to 3 people. You showed it to your creative director and your client, and went, fine, let's do it. Now there's levels of bureaucracy that everything has to be approved by. And as a result, creative people don't want to work that way. They'd rather go into some kind of digital platform, work for a website, work for a startup where, you know, what you do, you have an idea in the morning, you do it in the afternoon. In the agency world these days, you have an idea in the morning, you know, 3 months later, maybe it gets approved by someone. And you get to do it. So the corporate nature of the agency business, I think, has stifled creativity and has made it less attractive to good, young, creative people. I think they'd rather work somewhere else where their creativity could have more impact. The other thing is, I think marketing people, young marketing people, feel that they have more impact inside a client organization than they do inside an agency. I think a lot have a lot of what has happened in the agency business has taken away from the discretion that marketing people inside agencies once had, and the influence that they once had. So both on the business side and the creative side, I think the advertising business has lost some of its luster. I hate to keep saying bad things about the agency business, but you ask me a question, I have to tell you the truth. So I'm telling you what I think.
Thank you. I'm grateful for that. There's been a phenomenon in the USA which is not absolutely alien to the European reality, but we look at with some amazement, and is what is called the Great Resignation. The big quantities of people who are leaving voluntarily their jobs, and it seems that in agencies this has had an effect. There's a lot of people leaving the advertising industry. Do you think that the pressures that you were talking about a moment ago, or that maybe there's a lot of things that are making people feel that the advertising job is not fulfilling, and there's this question of burnout and tiring and tiredness and so on? Do you think this thing is happening over there?
Yeah, I think anyone who has talent and confidence in his or her talent and is in a bad agency situation feels a little freer now to do things on their own. Now, there are still some great agencies who do great work, and people really want to work for them. There's great demand to work in these agencies, but there are an awful lot of mediocre agencies that really are not fulfilling to work for. And I think talented people who are stuck in those agencies and see that they can make a living either freelancing or in some other way are tempted more than ever now to do that. And I think the fact that clients no longer have strict agency of record guidelines where you have to use this agency for everything, where they will bring in this kind of supplier and that kind of, and this kind of talent and that kind of talent. That helps people be more independent and be able to make a living in the advertising industry without having to work for an agency.
Okay. There's another thing about agencies that, at least in Europe, I think in the States too, there seem to be in later years obsessed with the word consultancy.
Yeah.
Because it seems that consultancy is more glamorous, has more prestige, it's more important than doing advertising. And a lot of people say that they are in creative consultancy, that they are consultants, strategic consultants and so on, and not agency people or creatives or planners or whatever, or account executives or whatever. Do you think there's a kind of inferiority complex, or what is at work here?
Well, there are a number of things at work. Number one, historically, consultants and consultancies have been connected to clients at the CEO level, whereas agencies were connected to clients at the CMO level. So consultancies had more punch. They were able, and as a result, the consultancies have now gotten into the advertising business. They have bought up agencies, and the agencies now want to be seen as consultants. But the problem is the consultants are better at pretending they're agencies than the agencies are at pretending they're consultants. So the consultancies are winning that battle. But
Yeah.
as far as small groups of people calling themselves consultants, it's just it's baloney. It's just fancy words to describe what they're really doing. And who cares what they call themselves? I mean, they can call themselves whatever they like. I don't think anyone pays any attention to it.
Okay. Well, talking about the actual advertising again, there's a lot of, perhaps people think that even too much at the moment, of goodwill, purpose, talking about sustainability, diversity, inclusion. To say it in simple and maybe unfair words, try to save in the world all the time.
Yeah.
Do you think this obsession or trend or whatever is going off the rails, or it's to the point? What's your opinion about it?
My opinion is that corporations, it's very important for them to do good things, to be charitable, to help people who need help, to do things that are valuable to society. And I think every corporation should have some part of its expenditures and some part of its efforts aimed at those kind of activities. But that should be distinctive from marketing. They shouldn't rub our noses in their virtue. I don't think it is good marketing to, I give to charity every year. I'm sure you give to charity every year. You don't put up billboards saying how charitable you are. You just do it because it's the right thing to do. And that's what I think corporations should do. They should do charitable things because it's the right thing to do, but not try to make marketing hay and advertising hay out of it. They should, I don't think most people care what their brand of peanut butter does. They don't buy peanut butter because because the peanut butter gives money to poor people. They buy peanut butter because it tastes good. So, or it's healthy, or there's some reason for it. I think we have way overdone brand purpose, and brands should do good things, but it should not be the basis for their marketing activities.
Okay. Another thing that, at least from talking to people who work in the industry and from one's impression that is happening, maybe, is that there is such an unimaginable amount of data going around that a very important part of what is the creative industry, which is taking decisions by not absolutely uninformed, of course, but taking decision by instinct and guts, led by experience, are missing in the industry. That kind of courageous decision based on knowledge and the feeling that something is good and it's going to work is slowly disappearing.
Yeah, data is just a fancy word for information. And of course, you need information when you create advertising. Everyone needs information to create successful advertising. There's no question about that. But the problem is, it's not the amount of data you have that helps you. It's the ability of people, the talent of people to understand what that data means and do something effective with it. I am sure that Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola have the exact same data. I'm sure they do. I am sure that Nike and Adidas all have the same data. It's not the amount, it's not the quantity of data that you have that's going to make you successful or not successful. It's the talent of the people who look at that data, understand what it means, and create something as a result of the interpretation of what that data means. That's going to make the difference. And the human aspect of that is every bit as important as the mathematical aspect of it. As a matter of fact, it's more important than you have to take the information and make it useful. That's what it's all about. That's where data is valuable.
Mm-hmm. And then apply. You would then apply your experience and.
Exactly. Yeah, you have to. Raw data is like having bricks laying around. Until you build a house with it, it's useless. You have to know what to do with it to make something useful. And you have to be an architect. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe sometimes go against what they say.
Yeah. Sometimes the data says something that nobody else can see, but you can see it. Hey, look, this information tells me why. You think it tells you X, but it tells me Y. That's what intelligence is, the ability to connect things that everyone else can't connect. But if you can connect some things, that's intelligence. And that's how data and information become useful.
Okay. Well, let's just two more questions, Bob.
Yeah.
I don't want to take much more of your time. Thank you very much. Well, one is there's been much talk in the last 2 years in which we have lived. All the world has gone through a very special, extraordinary, and sadly painful situation, which is the pandemic. And there's been much talk about how it has changed societies, ways of behavior, ways of thinking, ways of feeling, ways of working, and how it has changed us personally. How do you feel about it? Do you think that it has brought much change, really? And do you personally feel a different person from 2 years ago? What's your feelings about this?
My feeling is that there's no question that it has had short-term effects on how we live, and to some extent on how we think. But these are like, assuming that the pandemic goes away soon, which we are all hopeful it does, and that we can return to normal life. I believe within 3 to 5 years, human nature is human nature. We're not that different from how we were 100 years ago. What changed? Technology changes, gadgets change, but human beings don't change. We have the same emotions that we had 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago. Human nature is what it is, and we behave in certain ways. And the pandemic will, events change things for a short period of time, and then human beings return to their traditional behaviors, to their traditional beliefs. The long-term effect of the pandemic, there was a pandemic in 1918, and it changed things for a couple of years, and then people went back to being people, and that's what's going to happen. Of course, there's always changes in society. There's what we call progress. I'm not sure it's always progress, but we call it progress. And technology changes, and gadgets change. We're talking over the internet now. This wasn't possible just a few years ago. And so things change, but human beings pretty much stay the same.
Okay, just to finish, well, of course, we can recommend to all our readers and viewers your books and your blog and your conferences or whatever. It's always fun and it's always interesting and it's always informative and controversial. But now we are asking you for a recommendation.
Okay.
Reading or a viewing recommendation for people, something that you have read recently or seen recently that you think is worthwhile.
Yeah, I would recommend, there's two books by a guy named Paul Feldwick that I would recommend. His most recent book is called Why Does the Peddler Sing? And his previous book was called The Anatomy of Humbug. And Paul is a very wise interpreter of advertising, and I learned a lot reading his books.
Okay, I can attest that the first one is great. The second one I have to get to read it.
Okay.
But the first one is really great and interesting.
Good.
Okay, Bob. Thank you very much indeed.
My
It's been
pleasure.
a pleasure.